Charles Derudio's gripping first-hand account of Custer's last stand offers a vivid portrayal of one of history's most iconic battles. Derudio, an Italian nobleman and seasoned U.S. Army officer, served with the 7th Cavalry Regiment during the fateful Battle of the Little Bighorn. Though nicknamed Count No Account by Captain Frederick Benteen for his flamboyant tales and imperious attitude, Derudio was a competent soldier, rising to the rank of first lieutenant on December 15, 1875. However, his ambitious demeanor did little to endear him to Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer or other senior officers. Despite the tensions, Derudio survived the harrowing battle and later recounted the chaos and danger he faced. I narrowly escaped the perils of the Battle of the Little Bighorn on June 25th and 26th, 1876, and I am here to share my vivid memories of this extraordinary clash, he began. At approximately 10 a.m. on June 25th, General Custer's scouts returned with astonishing news. They had discovered a sprawling Indian village roughly 15 miles ahead, nestled along the Little Bighorn River. The scouts observed signs of the village retreating in response to our advancing forces. Without delay, we resumed our march, covering 2 or 3 miles, before General Custer ordered a halt to devise our assault strategy. General Custer divided the regiment into distinct units. Companies H, D, and K, led by Colonel F.W. Benteen, were sent to secure our left flank with strict instructions to clear any obstacles. Colonel Reno commanded Companies M and G, with my temporary assignment to Company A in the center. Meanwhile, General Custer himself spearheaded the right flank with Companies E, I, F, L, and C. Company B remained behind to protect the pack train. After advancing a few more miles, the central unit received orders to quicken the pace and head towards the river, some 6 or 7 miles ahead. Upon reaching the river, we crossed and emerged onto open plains, where we were ordered to form a battle line. As orders were issued, we charged forward at a gallop, chasing the enemy through a thick, blinding cloud of dust kicked up by the fleeing Indians. The suffocating dust rendered visibility nearly impossible, forcing Colonel Reno to halt the battalion. Dismounting quickly, Colonel Reno arranged a skirmish line, anchoring the right flank along the edge of a dry, densely wooded creek, while our horses were led into the woods. For safety, the Indians launched a ferocious assault. We returned fire, and the battle raged fiercely for nearly half an hour. During this chaos, we noticed a clearing across the creek where a few abandoned lodges stood in a park-like setting. Our line crossed the creek cautiously to investigate, only to be confronted by a force of around 200 screaming, charging warriors. Their sheer numbers and the intensity of their firepower quickly turned the situation dire. Surrounded and under relentless attack, retreat became nearly impossible. We found ourselves in a fight for survival, our formation struggling against overwhelming odds. Derudio's account paints a harrowing picture of the disarray, bravery, and grim realities of warfare, offering an invaluable perspective on the unfolding tragedy of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Entering the battle with only 100 men, we faced a relentless torrent of enemy fire that wreaked havoc on our small force. As we crossed the creek, I, positioned at the rear, spotted a guidon abandoned in the chaos and turned back to retrieve it. While navigating through the tangled woods, the guidon became ensnared in branches and slipped from my grasp. Dismounting to reclaim it, I led my horse to the south bank of the creek. Just as I prepared to remount, a bullet struck my horse. Startled and in agony, the animal bolted straight into the enemy ranks, leaving me dismounted and vulnerable with approximately 300 Sioux warriors just 50 yards away. They unleashed a whistling volley of gunfire. Yet by some miracle, I remained unharmed. Scrambling for cover, I fled to a nearby thicket, determined to defend myself and seek a means of survival. It was there that I encountered Fred Gerard, the interpreter, and Private Thomas F. O'Neill of Company G, 7th Cavalry. Gerard and O'Neill still had their horses, but like O'Neill, I was now on foot. Concerned that the horses might reveal our position, I proposed stampeding them to create a distraction, but my suggestion was dismissed. Opting to part ways, I crawled through the dense underbrush into the dry, deep bed of the creek, hoping to remain hidden until nightfall, when I might rejoin our command. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours in my precarious hiding spot. After about 10 tense minutes, I heard the sharp crack of pistol shots nearby, followed by the eerie voices of several native women. Cautiously raising my head, I saw a chilling sight. The women were scalping a soldier who may still have been alive. Two focused on the grisly act, while others performed a macabre war dance around them. Words cannot fully capture the horror of witnessing such brutality. Eventually, the women left, presumably in search of more victims, and I was left alone with my mounting dread. As I wrestled with my thoughts, a faint crackling sound drew my attention. To my dismay, it was the sound of flames. The Indians had set fire to the exceptionally dry wood nearby, and the blaze was spreading rapidly. Forced to abandon my hiding place, I crawled back along the same route I had taken earlier. Just as I reached the bank, a voice called out, "Lieutenant? You?" Though I could not see anyone at first, the persistent call led me to the party I had left earlier, now concealed in the creek bed. Mr. Gerard explained that he had tied the horses together and followed me down into the creek. Like me, they were deeply concerned about the advancing flames. Thankfully, a shift in the wind and a light rain brought the fire under control, extinguishing the immediate threat and renewing our hope of remaining hidden until darkness. It was now 3 p.m., and with 6 grueling hours until nightfall, we could do nothing but wait and pray for the cover of darkness to make our escape. Throughout this tense and nerve-wracking ordeal, we could hear the Indians around us, their voices chillingly close and echoing through the darkness. The flood of thoughts racing through my mind during those agonizing hours is beyond description. At long last, nightfall enveloped the landscape, the thick clouds obscuring the moon and granting us the concealment we so desperately needed. It was time to abandon our hiding spot and make our way toward the ford, located 2 miles to the south across an exposed plain. Mr. Gerard and the scout mounted their horses, while the soldier and I held on to the tails of the horses, trudging along through the impenetrable night. As we advanced, Gerard reassured us that if he were forced to leave us behind, he would alert Colonel Reno to our position to ensure our eventual rescue. The darkness was so profound that we could barely see, but the ominous sound of Indians returning to their village pierced the night air, keeping our nerves on edge. Upon reaching a wooded area near what we believed to be the ford we had crossed earlier in the day, we discovered we were mistaken. Frantically, we searched for the correct crossing and eventually found a bend in the stream, requiring us to ford the river twice. As we emerged from the water on the second crossing, we were startled to encounter 8 warriors. The 2 mounted men bolted instantly, leaving the soldier and me to dive into nearby bushes for cover. Kneeling in the undergrowth, I cocked my revolver and braced for a confrontation, ready to fire if they approached. To our astonishment, the warriors assumed we had fled. After a few tense moments of conversation among themselves, they continued on their way, leaving us undetected. Relieved but wary, I regrouped with the soldier, and we debated our next move. With every ford heavily guarded, another attempt to cross the river seemed suicidal. The hours dragged on, and as dawn broke, the distant sound of a cavalry unit approaching reached our ears. The rhythmic splashing of horses through the water stirred a glimmer of hope. Cautiously, I crept to the riverbank, and was greeted by the sight of what I thought were our gray cavalry horses ridden by men in military blouses, some wearing white hats. From my vantage point, I watched as they traversed the valley, some climbing a steep bluff while others crossed the river. My spirits lifted as I spotted a figure clad in a buckskin jacket, boots, and a white hat, someone I believed to be Captain Tom Custer. Convinced we had been saved, I stepped onto the riverbank and called out, "Tom, don't leave us here." To my utter horror, my call was met with a thunderous war cry and an onslaught of gunfire. 300 to 400 shots in a deafening volley. It was then I realized my grave mistake. The men were not cavalry, but warriors dressed in clothing and riding horses taken from our fallen comrades. Bullets tore through the branches around us as the soldier and I dove back into the bushes, crawling desperately to escape the murderous fire. The Indians on the bluff, noticing the disturbance in the foliage, began firing in our direction. We resolved to cross a nearby clearing, a mere 20 yards, to reach another patch of dense woods. Before moving, I carefully surveyed our surroundings and was met with a disheartening sight. Just 50 yards away, 4 or 5 Indians were advancing rapidly toward us. Nearby, I spotted 2 cottonwood stumps close together, forming a makeshift barricade. The soldier and I knelt behind this fragile cover, he clutching his carbine and I my revolver, ready to make a final stand. The warriors had yet to spot us, but when the leader was no more than 10 yards away, I steadied my aim and fired. The warriors were moving in single file when my shot rang out, causing them to abruptly halt and retreat. Private O'Neill, quick to act, fired his carbine at the second warrior, who was just turning his pony. His aim was precise, and the weapon proved reliable. The warrior dropped his reins, raised his hands briefly, and fell to the grass, meeting his eternal rest. Another warrior, the one I had initially greeted, rode a short distance away before following the same fate. The remaining group swiftly disappeared around the corner of the woods, vanishing from view. Meanwhile, the gunfire from the bluffs above persisted, but after our shots, it ceased. Seizing the moment, we retreated back to the thicket. From our hidden position, we could see the Indians on the bluffs. Their horses were securely tethered under the hill's protection, while a line of sharpshooters lay prone, their weapons trained on the battlefield. The sounds of battle continued to echo from the hills above. The sharp rattle of musketry intermingled with cheers from our comrades and war cries from the Native Americans. For a fleeting moment, our spirits lifted as we recognized the familiar cheer of fellow soldiers, but that hope was short-lived. We quickly realized that the woodland refuge where we were concealed had been set ablaze, forcing us to move once more. We crawled to the edge of the woodland, only to discover the flames had been ignited on both sides, leaving us encircled by fire. Searching desperately for shelter, we came across a dense patch of mulberry trees, where we crouched beneath the foliage. The grass surrounding this area was still damp from a recent drizzle, and the lack of wind slowed the fire's advance. As the flames crept closer, I managed to smother them with my gauntlet gloves, keeping the fire at bay. Once the surrounding fire had burned out, we found ourselves in a small, safe haven protected by the scorched earth. From this vantage point, we could observe everything around us without being seen. Peering through the smoky haze, we watched Native Americans moving in the distance. One, stationed about 70 or 80 yards away, appeared to be standing guard, watching the fire. Around 4 p.m., he fired 4 shots into the air, which I interpreted as a signal. Shortly after, another Native American began shouting loudly, repeating the same cry multiple times. Following these signals, we saw over 200 warriors leaving the area, crossing the river in a long procession. An hour later, the same signals echoed again, and another large group departed on horseback. Eventually, all remaining warriors disappeared from view. As the gunfire subsided, fading into sporadic distant shots, a sense of cautious hope began to take root. By 6 p.m., the area around us grew eerily quiet, with no signs of Native Americans nearby. It seemed the battlefield had been abandoned by both sides. We speculated that the regiment had withdrawn and decided to wait until nightfall to make our escape. Our plan was to cross the river, head toward the Yellowstone River, and construct a raft to float down to the Powder River, where our supply camp awaited. By this point, we had gone 36 hours without food or water, our energy sapped and our desperation mounting. At 8 p.m., under the cover of darkness, we waded through the river, crossing it twice, and ascended the bluffs cautiously, deciding on our direction. We moved slowly, covering about 2 miles before I climbed a high hill to survey the terrain. In the distance, approximately 2 miles away in the direction of the earlier fighting, I spotted a fire, Uncertain whether it belonged to Native Americans or our command, we resolved to investigate. Proceeding with great care, we descended the hill and began moving toward the fire. Each step was deliberate, climbing hills and pausing frequently to listen for any signs of danger. After traversing over a mile, we reached the summit of another hill and stopped once more to listen. Faint voices reached our ears, but they were too indistinct to identify. Then, in the stillness, we heard the familiar bray of a mule, followed by a challenge that made our hearts leap. "Halt! Who goes there?" The words, unmistakable and reassuring, signaled that we had finally found our cumbradas. The challenge was not directed at us, as we were still too far away and concealed by the darkness. But hearing it gave us the confidence to continue approaching cautiously. Despite the reassurance, we remained wary of the possibility of encountering Native Americans. When we were about 200 yards from the fire, I called out, "Picket, don't fire! It's DeRudio and Private O'Neill." We began running toward them. Our shouts were met with an exuberant cheer from the picket, and soon Lieutenant Varnum himself appeared, his face lighting up with relief at seeing us alive. Lieutenant Varnum, a brave and competent officer, greeted me with unrestrained joy, explaining that he had assumed I was among the dead. I eagerly inquired about the regiment's condition, desperately hoping we were the only casualties. That hope was dashed when he informed me that he had no word from the 5 companies under Custer's command, and that our force had already suffered the losses of Lieutenants McIntosh and Hodgson. Exhausted after 2 nights without sleep, I arrived at the camp around 2 a.m., but rest eluded me. Instead, I spent the hours speaking with Lieutenant Varnum, recounting my harrowing experiences and the close calls that had brought me back alive. As dawn broke, I met with the officers to report that the Native Americans had withdrawn from the area. At 8 a.m., we spotted cavalry approaching from a distance. First a few scouts, then an entire column. To our immense relief, it was General Brisbane's command arriving to reinforce us. Soon after, a long line of infantry appeared on the plain, and General Gibbon's force arrived. The sight of the blue coats moving steadily toward us stirred an overwhelming wave of emotion in the camp. When Generals Gibbon and Terry entered, battle-hardened men wept openly, overcome by relief and gratitude. Amidst the reunion and the flurry of activity, I could not help but reflect on Private O'Neill's unwavering loyalty and bravery. Through every danger, he had followed my orders and stood by my side like a true brother-in-arms. His courage and steadfastness during those perilous hours earned my deepest respect and gratitude, as well as that of his comrades. Private O'Neill's actions exemplified the very best of a soldier's duty, and his company commander held him in the highest regard. I will forever remember his invaluable service and the bond we shared in the face of unimaginable adversity. Thank you for watching the video until the end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new videos from us. What do you think about today's topic? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found the video helpful, feel free to share it with your friends and family. We hope you had a great time. See you in the next video with even more exciting content. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.